Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is lukemick. If it is your first time here, I welcome you, and you may be wondering what the hell is a Criterion Marathon and why did I click on this video? Well, don't you worry, I'm going to explain to you exactly what you're about to watch, assuming that you're going to continue watching this video. So essentially, a Criterion Marathon is where I go to my Blu-ray shelf and I pick out 3 Criterion films that I have not yet seen. I sit down, I watch them all in a row in a marathon, and I film and discuss my first reactions and essentially my reviews for the films that I watch. I'd also like to mention, if you have access to these films and you are interested in watching them, definitely feel free to join along in the marathon as well and leave a comment down below if you have any differing opinions or maybe similar opinions to me on the films that we're going to discuss in this video. So now that I've laid the groundwork a little bit, why don't we go ahead and get started with the Criterion Marathon. Okay, so we just watched Blowout, starring John Travolta and Nancy Allen, directed by Brian De Palma. Brian De Palma is oftentimes considered one of the great American filmmakers, and I've never personally felt that way about any of the films that I've seen of his. I've seen Scarface, Mission Impossible, and The Untouchables up until this point, and although I like those films and I think they're good in their own right, they've never been favorites of mine or films that I ever want to go back and rewatch. So I've really been looking for the perfect De Palma film for me over the past, 5 years or so. And I thought that Blowout would probably be the one. I was very intrigued by it. And now that I've watched it, although I do really enjoy it, and I'd say it's probably my favorite De Palma film that I've seen so far, it's not perfect. It has its issues, and I just want to talk a little bit about those now that I've watched it. So essentially, Blowout is about a sound recordist played by John Travolta who accidentally or just happens to pick up the sound, the audio of a car crash. That car belonged to a man who was running to be president, and he was a very prominent political figure. So John Travolta really starts to unravel this political cover-up, and he realizes that he's the only person that really knows what's going on, and that he's at risk, and the woman that he saved is also at risk. So the setup for this film is honestly it's awesome. I love the opening shot. It's essentially a oneer of the horror movie that John Travolta is getting the sounds for. It just does a really good job of setting the scene for the film. The director wants John Travolta to look for a wind sound, because he doesn't like the way it sounds in the film. So that's why John Travolta ends up accidentally capturing this car crash, is because he's just out on a bridge recording frogs croaking, owls hooting, and then the wind, of course. And that scene is so beautiful. I love the first act of this film, and that scene in particular. It's definitely the best part of the entire film. There are a lot of split focus shots in that scene, and they are absolutely gorgeous, and it just gives the film such a deep, intense mood. It's great filmmaking. It looks so good, and it's used very appropriately, if you ask me. The sound is amazing. The way it's edited is absolutely fantastic, capturing the motions of John Travolta with his wand, capturing each sound, his reaction, jumping into the water. That entire scene to me is just so well edited and just really sets the mood for the story in just such a profound, great way. I was so excited for the rest of it after seeing the first part of the film, the first act, really. But it kind of goes down a path that to me just becomes more Hollywood and just more uninteresting, if you ask me. So first of all, I'd just like to talk about the characters before I move on. So Jack, played by John Travolta, is perfect, I think. I think that John Travolta fits into this type of character really well. He's kind of got this sly, slick demeanor about him. And he also has a really good backstory, too, the character. And John Travolta really wears that character's backstory really well and has a lot of regret. And you can really feel in those moments, if you ask me. I think they did a really good job of developing his character and making him really likable. Nancy Allen plays Sally, the woman he saves from drowning in the car. I don't know if she's exactly a prostitute or what her profession is, but her character to me just it really dragged this whole thing down. She is so naive, so oblivious to the danger that she is potentially in, and she's just dumb. In the beginning, it's fine. Like, John Travolta's and her kind of have, like, a little bit of a romance budding a little bit.
So I was like, ah, whatever.
But she becomes much more prominent by the third act of the film.
And the third act of this film is where it really just started to fall apart for me. And I'll get into that. But I just wanted to mention, Travolta was great. Nancy Allen was good at keeping the performance of this character consistent, but I did not like the character at all. There's a really great scene in the middle where John Travolta goes into his recording studio and he notices something is wrong and the camera is spinning around the room. It does a ton of rotations. I can't even remember how many times it spun, but that was an incredible scene. There are a lot of really great filmmaking techniques and wonderful shots in this film. It is a very professional and precise looking film. Everything is so intricate until the third act of the film. There's a lot of intrigue and a lot of good build up throughout the first, I'd say, hour and 20 minutes of this movie, but then the finale, the climax, it just didn't work for me. It relies a lot on Nancy Allen's character, and her character is just so stupid and doesn't realize what's happening. It just drove me nuts. It's like, why are you this blind to what's happening in front of you? It's like the movie wouldn't have come to the climax it did. It wouldn't have had the big, exciting ending it had if her character weren't so fucking stupid. I guess I can't say it's just poor writing, but it's... She put the nail in the coffin on this one. You know, and it sucks because the first act especially, and into the second act, I felt like the editing was just super well done. Everything was really clear and, like I said, precise. But then by the third act, it starts to get so messy and haphazardous to me. I really wish they could have kept the tone and the pace that they did in the first half of the film, but it just really starts to become unbelievable and just unrealistic. It's not like it gets boring, it's still exciting, but it just loses that caliber of craft that I wanted it to have throughout the entire film. Now, I want to go into a quick spoiler, so if you haven't seen the film or you don't want to hear a spoiler because you haven't seen it for a while or something, go to this part in the video to see my final thoughts on the film, but I'm going to quickly talk about what I want to talk about. So I will say, I just said I didn't like the climax of the film, but I do love the very end of the film. There's a really fun running gag throughout the film where the director of the film that John Travolta is working on is looking for the perfect scream for a shower murder scene in the film he's making. And of course, John Travolta, being the sound recordist guy, is supposed to find that scream. Well, a bunch of times throughout the film, we get his director guy, his boss, coming in and saying,
"Hey, we need you for the scream." What
are you doing? What are you doing?
And of course, John Travolta doesn't have any time for that. He's been busy trying to unravel this political cover-up. But by the end of the film, we see that John Travolta found the perfect scream, and the director and everyone in the room loves it. And John Travolta sits there very intensely and is just contemplating. And the thing that's so amazing about that, and you know because you've seen the movie, is that that's the screams of Sally being murdered at the end of the film during the climax. So that was just like the perfect tongue-in-cheek way to end the film. I think I really love that, and that really took me back into it. I was like, yes, that's a really twisted and sad and depressing and just very upsetting ending, and that really gave me, I think, what I was looking for with this film. So that's essentially my thoughts on Blowout. It is my favorite De Palma film that I've seen thus far. Like I said at the beginning of this review, I don't love it. I do really like things about it, but it kind of goes down a little bit of a rocky path towards the end. But maybe it'll grow on me later in life, and I'm sure there are plenty of other De Palma films I can watch to hopefully find the perfect one for me. So without any further ado, let's move on to the next film of the Criterion Marathon. Tu Mama Tambien, directed by Alfonso Cuarón. I feel like I don't have too much to say about this film, although I did think it was pretty good. So essentially, this film is a road trip dramedy. Romantic dramedy, I guess you would say. Essentially, it's about two like high school age kids, or they might be right out of high school, around that age, and their girlfriends go to trips to Spain or somewhere in Europe or something. So they have the summer to themselves, basically, and they decide to take a woman who's a little bit older than them on a road trip, basically because they want to have sex with her. And you start to learn a lot about these characters throughout the film and their relationships, things like that. You know, it's a road trip movie. It's a coming of age movie of sorts, and it's emotionally impactful in some ways. So the two main characters, played by Gael Garcia Bernal and Diego Luna, are best friends. They've been friends for probably their entire lives, and you know, they have very similar interests. They have a pact, a code, they do everything together. But this film is really about their relationship being tested and their friendship maybe not being as perfect as they thought it was. These two characters in particular I found to be a little bit hard to connect with, just because they sexualize a lot of things, and they're honestly pretty misogynistic and sexist at times. They kind of say a lot of things that they probably don't mean, because they really are very vulnerable people on the inside, as we learn throughout the film. But at the beginning and stuff, there's a really disgusting scene in a pool on two diving boards, and I was just like, oh my god, I can't believe that was in this movie. This film is very sexually explicit, which I wasn't expecting. I don't know why I wasn't expecting that. I guess I've never really had that type of experience with a Cuarón film before,
but this one gave that to me, so
I think that their characters were a little bit hard to just they weren't that likable. They were kind of mean-spirited in a way. But really the film is about watching their relationship and how it goes through changes. And by the end of it, I personally felt like I knew them for a really long time. So Cuarón and his brother who wrote with him, they did a really good job at giving these characters the sort of history that they deserved. That's something that I can definitely commend the film for. Also, I want to say Gael Garcia Bernal and Diego Luna both look so damn young in this film, especially Diego Luna. I knew they were in the film, I knew they starred in it, but I saw them and I was like, my god, they look like children. It was crazy seeing them that young. I was not expecting that at all, and I got that. So that was really interesting. And the woman that they take on the road trip, I can't remember the character's name, nor do I know the actress's name. I think she was in Pan's Labyrinth, though. Her character also was a giant emotional anchor in this film. She's going through a divorce, or she's in the process of leaving her husband. It's not exactly a mutual thing, but she decides that she has to
get out of that marriage.
And going on this road trip with these two sex-crazed boys is just a really weird dynamic, and it just creates a lot of very sensual and just sweet situations between them. And in those scenes where she's clearly having a difficult time with this whole separation and divorce thing, you kind of see a sweeter side of the boys as well. And I think their relationship between all three of them, the trio of them, is definitely flawed and doesn't always work out. There is something that clicks between all of them, and it was really interesting to watch that throughout the entire film. The soundtrack is also really solid. I can't say that I know what most of the music is. There's a lot of Spanish music that I'm not familiar with, but there's a Brian Eno song in it. The soundtrack just fits really well in this road trip scenario, this situation. And yeah, that's really all I can say about Tu Mama Tambien. I think you should just watch it for yourself if you haven't seen it. I don't really want to spoil anything, but by the end of it, I felt very sad. I was just like, oh my god, that's a really like bittersweet, sad way to end this. It was
kind of depressing
in a way, and you can also just really feel a lot of the pent-up rage and insecurities throughout the film, and it's well written. It's really well written. I will say that as far as Cuarón's films go, this is definitely the least visually appealing of his films that I have seen. And also there's like a narration portion of this film. The narrator cuts in maybe like 20 times throughout the film. It's a lot, honestly. And just the way they handled the sound editing when he would come in, I thought was really weird, because the characters would be talking and the camera would be kind of pulled back, and then the sound would cut out for like a second completely, and then the narrator would come in and there would be no other sound. And at that moment, he realized he forgot to put his laundry in the dryer. It's a really weird, nitpicky little thing I'm bringing up here, but it was just noticeably awkward to me. But by the end of it, I really appreciated the narration and everything that we got to learn through the narration. So, that's what I thought of Tu Mama Tambien. The more I think about it, the more I do appreciate the film, and I would recommend it if you are a fan of Cuarón's work and you want to see something that is a little bit different from what he's been doing in this century. Now, let's move on to the final film of this Criterion Marathon. Okay, so I just finished watching Hiroshi Teshigahara's Woman in the Dunes. And just a disclaimer, if my hair looks wet or my collar looks discolored or something, I just grilled out in the rain. Had to make dinner, and I didn't realize it was going to be pouring rain out this evening, but that's besides the fact. So, Woman in the Dunes. This is the type of film that... I'll start by giving just a short synopsis of the film. A teacher/entomologist, a man who looks for insects, is in the sand dunes somewhere in Japan, and he's looking for a particular bug. He misses the last bus back into Tokyo for the night, so he asks the villagers, is there a place for me to stay? And they say, sure, you can stay with this woman. The woman lives at the bottom of a giant sand pit. She basically lives in a big hole in the ground, and you have to take a rope ladder to get down there. So the man stays there for the night and has dinner, goes to sleep, whatever, everything's pretty normal. But the next morning when he wants to leave, the ladder is gone. So the film is essentially about this man and this woman who's been living in this hole for a long time, an indefinite amount of time, and the man trying to devise a plan to escape the hole, and the different trials and tribulations that they have to go through to live together in this very odd and unethical situation. I really can't talk about this film without going into spoilers, I guess. Not that this film has any major climactic events or scenes or anything. It very much is just a movie that you watch and you experience, and it keeps a very consistent pace throughout the entire thing. There aren't any big things that happen in the film. But I still don't want to ruin anything for people who haven't seen the film. So if you have not seen Woman in the Dunes and you're interested in watching it, definitely watch the film before you watch me spout my mouth about it. So just so we have that clear, there are going to be spoilers in this discussion or reaction or whatever you want to call it. Let me talk first about the cinematography and the sound design and the score. So the score is haunting. It's chilling. It sounds almost like an old horror movie score, like it could have been in a Hitchcock film, or it kind of reminds me a little bit of The Shining. There's a lot of harpsichord and piano and flute, a lot of really high-pitched sounds are pulsing through this film in the score, and it gives you just a very on-edge, tense feeling. The sound design as well, with the sand, is just uproarious. The sand is always crumbling, and the wind is always blowing, and you can always hear the sand flying across the roof of the house and just getting everywhere. And the thing about this film, the thing that Woman in the Dunes is very famous for, is the sand as a character. The sand is everywhere in this film, and the cinematography and the way they shoot the sand is very, very beautiful. Teshigahara, I think, was a documentary short film maker before he made this film, and that's very obvious based on how he captures stillness and how he's able to convey emotions through that stillness. You know, and the way that the two characters, I'll refer to them as the man and the woman because they don't really get names in the film. They talk about the sand, especially the woman, when she's explaining what life is like down there to the man, that the sand is just
inconvenience.
Like, anything that goes wrong or anything that's unpleasant about living there is because of the sand. The sand draws water and makes everything damp. The sand puts out fire that makes their lamp burn out. You know, everything that happens that is just annoying is because of the sand. So the sand really acts as this barrier to the man character in particular, because the woman is very content with living down there. She's been there for a very long time. We learn that she had a husband and a daughter at some point, but they were killed by the sand. But yet she still has this attachment to the house, to the work, to the sand itself, maybe. And the man is just always trying to wrap his head around that idea and thinks she's just absolutely crazy for not having the desire to escape, to get out of there, because he feels like he's being enslaved, and he technically is. Yeah, do you understand why this is kind of a spoilery review at this point? Because I just have to talk about what happens in the movie to express my feelings about the film, you know? It makes sense, right? See, the main thing about The Woman in the Dunes is that this film just has such a methodical, rhythmic pace to it that I feel like I could just watch it for hours. Time goes by in the film, months. I think the film probably takes place over a year. We do learn at the end of the film that the man has been down there for at least 7 years at a certain point. God, there's just I'm having a difficult time forming my opinions and my thoughts on this film in a manner that makes sense to the video, makes sense to the camera, but my mind is just spinning with all of the different feelings and thoughts and interpretations that I had while watching the film. I want to comment a little bit on the relationship between the man and the woman. It's really odd. At first, when he gets there, he's very kind, you know, he's very charming and nice to the woman, and she's offering him food and water and a place to sleep. She's very welcoming. And then for the first, week, he's very angry that he's stuck down there. He's very short with her. He even ties her up at one point. But then more time goes by as he starts to learn that he's not getting out of this situation easily. They have sweeter, more sensual moments together, which are nice. Their characters just interact in such a weird way. The woman is very docile and is always pretty calm about the situation. Everything has been very normalized for her. And even when the man gets kind of rough with her, it never really creates a conflict. She doesn't really hold anything against him. She's always just willing to put up with his more angry tendencies, because there are times throughout this film where he's totally fine and content with what's happening.
But then something just makes him snap.
And he also deceives her a lot. There's one part of the film that is pretty impactful to me where he escapes, essentially. He finds a way for himself to escape, but then he falls into quicksand and has to be helped by his captors, and they just bring him back to the hole and bring him back to the woman. And she is watching as they're lowering him back down into the hole. There are just so many different thoughts and feelings that were going through my head about how each character was going to reflect on this deceit. And, gosh, yeah, this is only halfway, this is towards the end of the movie, I guess, but God, I feel like I still have so much more to say. Can you tell that this film just makes you think a lot? At least it's making me think a lot. There's just so much to unpack with this. I'm sorry if this is a very sporadic discussion. I just needed to spill my guts out in front of the camera here about this. I'll just talk about one more thing, just so I don't prolong this too much. The end of the film. By the end of the film, we learn that at least 7 months have gone by, because the woman is now pregnant and the man has facial hair, his hair is longer, and his demeanor is just more in tune with the lifestyle that the woman has been living. He's accepted his position much more than he had before, and we also see a scene where he burns all of the insects that he collected, kind of like he is cleansing himself of his former life and just giving up on the hope of leaving, of escaping, of having freedom again. And the woman, we learn almost right at the end of the film, is having an atomic pregnancy. I think that's what it's called. It's a pregnancy where the egg is being fertilized outside of the uterus, if I'm not mistaken. I don't usually get into these biology, anatomy discussions here, but I'm pretty sure that's what that means. And usually, well, I don't think a child has ever survived that. I think the baby will certainly die, and there's a good possibility it will kill her as well. The captors take her out of the hole and leave the man there, and they left the ladder down. He goes up the ladder, he takes a walk around the beach, which he's been wanting to do for a majority of the film, just to have a breath of fresh air from life in the hole, and he goes back down. He could escape, he could run away, he could go back home. I think he has a wife back home, he could go back to his job, but he doesn't do that. He goes back down to the hole. And the reason he does that is because he has found a way to suction water from under the dune with buckets. By burying buckets in the sand, he's creating water, essentially. And it's like that discovery of his is what helps propel him to continue on with his life down there. It gives his life purpose again, which he thought he had lost when he was first held captive, when he was first confined into this well. There's obviously a lot of symbolism there. Water means life in most literature. It's a sign of life. And by him creating water, he's not only creating life, he's creating the means of living, because everyone needs water to survive. That creation of his is enough to make him go back into the hole and want to stay there and wait for the woman to return. Another thing is that he's been with this woman for so long, she's bearing his child who's not going to make it, but he has this obligation to stay there with her and for her, because she mentions many times throughout the film that she is worried about being left alone. She doesn't want to wake up and have nobody there with her. So over time, I think the relationship just develops, and he just has this obligation within himself that he needs to be there for her. And the thing is, we don't know if she's coming back or not. I mean, there's a good chance that she's going to die because of this pregnancy. And the film pretty much leaves you there. It leaves you with that, and it tells you the man's name, I can't remember the name, his date of birth, and that he's been missing for 7 years, and then the film ends. So there is a lot of metaphorical, thematic stuff happening in this film, and I'm sure a lot of people have different interpretations, but something that I really pulled from this was just that this man found purpose in this hole, which is why he didn't leave right away, and that thematic and metaphorical identifier, water, being the reason why he's staying, water, and his obligation to the woman, I think is what I see in the film. I think it's pretty beautiful, and I've been going on about this for so long. Woman in the Dunes is a really incredible film. It truly is. If you watch this discussion for some reason without having seen the film, I hope that you can watch it now and still enjoy it. I hope that you do watch it and come back and let me know what you thought of it, and let us all know, because this film is open for a lot of discussion, and it's really incredible. It's a truly fantastic film. I'm very impressed with it. I really want Criterion to put more of Teshigahara's work on Blu-ray. I know The Face of Another is a famous film of his that is out of print right now. I hope it comes back, because I'd love to watch that. Something that I want to mention about this Blu-ray edition for Woman in the Dunes right here is that it actually includes 4 short films that he directed, 3 of which came out before this film, and 1 of them came out after the fact, if I'm not mistaken. So this Blu-ray by Criterion, to me, is very valuable, because you essentially get 5 of his films for the price of 1 Criterion Blu-ray. Really a valuable Blu-ray in my opinion, and just a valuable film in general. I really love it. It is a fantastic film. Man, I guess that's all I should say about it. This is already going way longer than I wanted it to, but I'm glad that I was able to just talk it through to myself and to all of you. So that's essentially everything. Well, it is everything for this Criterion Marathon. I want to thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. It really helped me out. And subscribe to the channel if you want to see more Criterion-related content like this. And that's all I have for you. Thank you all for watching once again, and I will talk to you later.